The rain poured endlessly that night. It wasn't just water falling from the sky. It was as if the world itself was weeping. Arjun sat on the edge of his broken bed, staring at the flickering bulb above him. The walls of his small rented room were cracked, damp, and echoing with silence. His phone lay beside him, no messages, no calls, no hope. He once had dreams, big ones. He wanted to start his own business, help his family out of poverty, and give his mother a life she had only seen in dreams. But now, those dreams felt like ashes in his hands. Investors had backed out. His friends had disappeared. And his mother, she was sick, waiting for him in a hospital bed he could no longer afford to pay for. He buried his face in his palms, trembling. Everything he'd built was collapsing, piece by piece. The world felt cruelly unfair, mocking his efforts, laughing at his pain. He whispered to himself, "Why me? What did I do wrong?" The sound of rain against the window was the only answer. For days, he stopped talking to anyone. He walked through the city like a ghost, eyes empty, pockets empty, heart even emptier. At one point, he stood on a bridge, looking down at the rushing water below. A strange peace came over him. One step forward, and all the pain would end. One moment, and he would never have to face another disappointment again. But then he heard a voice. A small boy, no more than 10 years old, was standing a few feet away, holding a box of cheap flowers. His clothes were torn, his face was dirty, but his eyes, they were bright, filled with something Arjun had lost long ago: hope. "Sir," the boy said softly, "would you like to buy a flower? I haven't eaten since yesterday." Arjun froze. He stared at the boy, at his trembling hands holding those wilted flowers. And something inside him shifted. This child was living a life 10 times harder than his own, yet he was still trying, still standing, still believing. Arjun took the last few coins from his pocket and handed them to the boy. The boy smiled, a genuine, innocent smile that seemed to cut through all the darkness. "Thank you, sir. My mother will be happy today," he said, before running off into the rain. Arjun stood there motionless. That one sentence echoed in his mind: "My mother will be happy today." He thought of his own mother, lying in the hospital, waiting for her son to fight again. For the first time in weeks, he felt something spark inside him. Not strength, not courage, but a simple refusal to give up. That night, he didn't sleep. He went back home, wiped the dust off his old laptop, and started writing. He poured every failure, every heartbreak, every moment of despair into his words. He wrote about struggle. He wrote about loss. But most importantly, he wrote about rising again. Days turned into weeks. He published those writings online, not expecting anything, not seeking attention. But people began to read. They began to comment, "Your story gave me strength. I was about to give up too, thank you. You made me believe again." Each message reignited his will. He realized something profound. The pain that once broke him was now helping others heal. The failure that made him hate life was now teaching people to love theirs again. He started visiting the hospital every evening, sitting beside his mother's bed, telling her about the strangers around the world who were inspired by his words. Her smile grew weaker each day, but her eyes sparkled with pride. She whispered once, "You see, my son, sometimes life takes everything from us, only to give us something far more precious: purpose." And when she finally closed her eyes for the last time, he didn't cry. He simply held her hand and said, "Thank you for teaching me how to live." He walked out of that hospital, into the rain again, the same rain that once made him want to die. But this time it felt different. It wasn't the sound of sorrow anymore. It was the rhythm of life, whispering, "You made it through." Arjun decided that day, no matter how dark the night gets, he would be the light for someone else lost in it. He began to travel, speak, and write more, telling people across the world, "Pain is not the end. Failure is not defeat. And darkness is just the beginning of light." But one evening, years later, as he stood on stage before thousands of people, he saw a familiar face in the crowd. A young man holding a small box of flowers. The same boy from that rainy bridge, now grown up, smiling proudly. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Arjun finally understood, the smallest act of kindness can change an entire life. He took a deep breath, raised his head toward the lights, and spoke from the heart, words that would echo for generations. "Do not curse your hard times," he said. "They are not breaking you, they are building you." And the crowd rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, crying, not for the speaker, but for the truth that lived within them all. Because deep down, every person in that hall had their own rain, their own darkness, and their own bridge to cross. But that night they believed, if he could overcome it, so could they. The applause thundered, the lights shone brighter, and in Arjun's eyes a single tear fell, not of pain, but of gratitude. For the first time in his life, he realized every broken piece of his past had led him right here to his purpose, his destiny, and his peace. After the event ended, the crowd slowly dispersed into the night, leaving behind a hum of energy that still buzzed in the air. Arjun stood backstage, staring at the empty chairs, feeling a quiet warmth settle in his chest. The noise faded, but the echoes of applause still lingered somewhere deep inside him. For years, he had fought against despair, and now, he was living proof that pain could transform into something beautiful. The young man with the flowers approached him as the hall emptied. He was taller now, his hair neatly combed, his eyes shining with the same light Arjun remembered from that rainy night. He held out a single red flower. "Do you remember me, sir?" he asked softly. Arjun smiled, his throat tightening. "How could I ever forget?" The young man laughed nervously. "That night, you bought a flower from me when no one else did. I was starving. That money bought food for my mother. It gave me the strength to keep going. And I told myself one day I would thank you." Arjun took the flower gently, his hands trembling slightly. "You already did," he said. "You reminded me that hope can survive anywhere, even in the rain." The boy smiled wider, tears forming in his eyes. "I'm studying now," he said proudly. "Scholarship. I want to become a teacher to help other kids like me." Arjun felt his heart swell with emotion. It was as if life had come full circle. That small act of kindness, born from his own pain, had sparked another flame in the darkness. When the young man left, Arjun sat alone in the quiet auditorium. He placed the flower on the podium and looked around at the empty seats. Each one had held someone searching for meaning, someone trying to survive their own battles. He realized something profound. No speech, no success, no achievement had ever given him this kind of peace. It was the connection, the shared understanding of struggle, the invisible thread of humanity that tied every wounded soul together. Outside, the city was alive again. Streetlights flickered, cars passed by, laughter echoed in the distance. Life was still moving, unstoppable, unpredictable, but endlessly beautiful. Arjun walked through the streets with his hands in his pockets, letting the cool night breeze touch his face. He thought of his mother again, and somehow he could almost hear her voice in the wind, soft, proud, eternal. He reached a small tea stall on the corner, a place he used to visit when he was struggling. The same old man was still there, stirring sugar into steaming cups of tea. "Long time, Beta," the old man said with a grin. "You've changed. The whole world knows your name now." Arjun smiled faintly. "Maybe, but some things never change, uncle. One cup of tea, just like before." They sat together on a wooden bench, sipping quietly. The tea was the same, strong, slightly bitter, comforting. Arjun looked around at the people passing by. A man arguing on the phone, a couple sharing laughter, a woman carrying groceries, her tired eyes still full of love. He realized that every one of them carried a story, a hidden pain, a silent victory. The old man spoke again. "You know, son, people think success means no more problems. But I think success just means learning to smile while facing them." Arjun nodded. "You're right. The problems never stop coming. But maybe that's what keeps us alive, the challenge, the growth." He finished his tea, left a generous tip, and began walking again. He didn't have a destination. He just wanted to feel the pulse of life around him. The neon signs reflected on the wet streets, the honking of cars mixed with laughter, the smell of roasted corn filled the air. It was chaotic, imperfect, but it was real. His phone buzzed. A message from a young woman. "Your speech tonight saved my life. I was going to give up. Thank you for reminding me to fight again." Arjun stopped walking. He looked up at the night sky, blinking away the sudden tears. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he whispered softly, "Thank you, God." He thought back to that night on the bridge years ago, when he was ready to end it all. If he had taken that one step, how many lives would never have been touched? How many souls would never have found hope through his story? Sometimes the hardest days aren't punishments, they're invitations to rise. He walked past a small park where children were still playing, chasing each other under the dim streetlights. One of them tripped and fell, scraping his knee. He started crying, but another boy quickly helped him up. Within seconds, they were laughing again. Arjun smiled. That was life. Falling, breaking, bleeding, and still finding a way to laugh again. As he crossed the road, he noticed a billboard that caught his eye. It was an advertisement for a motivational event in another city, his name printed across it in bold letters. But below his name was something that made him pause, featuring stories of hope from ordinary people. He chuckled softly. That was exactly what he wanted now, to make it about others. His own story was just a beginning, a bridge for others to cross. Back in his apartment later that night, he opened his notebook. The pages were filled with ideas, quotes, and scribbles. But on one page, he wrote something new, something simple. When life breaks you, it's not ending you. It's shaping you into the person you were meant to be. He closed the notebook and leaned back, watching the city lights twinkle outside his window. Somewhere out there, someone was crying. Someone was praying for a miracle. Someone was on the verge of giving up. He wished he could tell them, you're closer to your breakthrough than you think. But maybe he didn't need to. Maybe the universe had its own way of sending that message, through moments, through strangers, through small acts of kindness that ripple far beyond what we can see. Arjun stood by the window, breathing in the cool night air. His heart no longer carried the weight of the past, it carried gratitude. Because the storms that once drowned him had taught him how to swim. Because the pain that once silenced him had given him a voice. Because life, in all its cruelty, had still been generous enough to give him meaning. And as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the world in gold, Arjun smiled quietly to himself, ready to keep walking, because the story was far from over. The sun rose gently, brushing the city with a soft glow. The streets that were drenched in last night's rain now glistened, alive again with morning energy. Arjun stood by his window, watching the world wake up. The vendors setting up their stalls, children rushing to school, rickshaws honking impatiently. Everything seemed ordinary, yet to him, it was extraordinary. Each small moment felt sacred, as if the universe had handed him a second chance to truly see life for what it was. He made himself a cup of black coffee and sat down at his desk, opening his old laptop once again. The screen had scratches, the keys were faded, but it had witnessed every stage of his journey, from hopeless nights to triumphant mornings. He began to write, not to teach or preach, but simply to share what his heart carried. He wrote about the bridge, the rain, the boy with the flowers. He wrote about how pain molds the soul, how the smallest acts of kindness create ripples we can never measure. His words flowed effortlessly, like they had been waiting inside him all along. As he typed, he thought of all the people he had met, the broken, the lost, the dreamers. He remembered the single mother he once met after a seminar who told him that his story gave her courage to face her divorce. He thought of a young student who had been bullied but chose to keep going after reading his book. They all carried pieces of him, and he carried pieces of them. The world outside was changing, fast and loud, but Arjun had found stillness inside himself. Every hardship he once cursed now looked like a stepping stone. Every loss had been a teacher. He realized that life doesn't get easier, we just get stronger, wiser, more compassionate. His phone rang. It was an invitation from an organization that supported orphan children. They wanted him to give a motivational talk to the kids. Without hesitation, he said yes. Later that week, he arrived at the orphanage. The building was old but filled with color, painted walls, paper butterflies hanging from the ceiling, laughter echoing in the corridors. As he walked in, dozens of curious eyes turned toward him. Some of the children were barefoot, some shy, but all of them radiated something rare, raw innocence. He stood before them, unsure at first how to begin. But then he smiled and said, "Do you know what's stronger than pain? Hope." The children listened intently. He told them his story about how he failed, fell, and stood again. He spoke of his mother's love, of the rainy night that changed everything. He saw their eyes widen, their faces soften. And for a moment, the world outside that orphanage didn't matter. There was only connection, truth, and light. After the session, a small girl walked up to him. She couldn't have been older than 8. She held out a folded piece of paper and whispered, "This is for you." Arjun opened it. Inside, in crooked handwriting, were the words, "I will not give up. Thank you for showing me." He looked at her, speechless, his heart heavy with emotion. He knelt down and said, "Promise me one thing. When you grow up, you'll help someone else not give up too." She nodded eagerly, smiling through her missing front tooth. It was such a simple moment, Yet it hit him harder than any award, any fame, any applause. Because right there, he saw the essence of everything he had been searching for: purpose. That evening, when he returned home, he couldn't stop thinking about the children. Their laughter, their strength, their ability to dream despite everything they lacked. He realized that maybe his mission wasn't just to motivate people with words, it was to create something real, something that could change lives. He began planning a foundation that would support underprivileged kids, provide education, mentorship, and a place where they could dream freely. He named it the Bridge of Hope. The name came naturally. It was a reminder of where it all began, the night when a small act of kindness built a bridge between two lost souls. Weeks passed, and the foundation started growing. Volunteers joined, donations came in, and soon dozens of children had access to books, clothes, and dreams again. Arjun would visit them every weekend, spending hours listening to their stories, watching them play, guiding them, learning from them. Each time he saw them laugh, he was reminded of his own journey, how despair had led him to this exact moment. It made him realize that maybe life's greatest pain often hides its greatest gift. One night, after the children had gone to sleep, he sat alone in the quiet hall, the sound of the ceiling fan humming softly. He looked around at the drawings on the walls, the neatly folded bedsheets, the bookshelf filled with donated stories, and smiled. He took out his phone and recorded a short message for his online followers. "Friends," he said gently, "I've learned that hard times are not here to destroy us. They come to show us who we are. Every person you meet, every challenge you face, they're shaping you, guiding you, preparing you for something bigger than you can imagine. So when it hurts, don't run. Stay. Grow through it. Because one day, you'll look back and realize that the things that once broke you became the reason someone else stood strong." He posted the video before going to bed, not expecting anything. But by morning, it had gone viral. Millions watched, thousands commented, and messages poured in from every corner of the world. People shared their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. His words had once again become a bridge connecting countless hearts. Arjun didn't feel proud, he felt grateful. He knew now that this was his calling, to turn pain into power, to turn darkness into light. As he stood by the window again that morning, the city alive with noise and motion, he whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. For every sleepless night, for every failure, for every tear that had taught him how to feel. Because now, he finally understood the meaning of it all, that life's beauty lies not in perfection, but in perseverance. And that sometimes the universe breaks you apart only to rebuild you into someone capable of healing others. The world outside shimmered with the warmth of morning. And deep in his heart, Arjun knew. The story was still unfolding, one soul, one act of kindness, one heartbeat at a time. The days that followed were filled with a rhythm Arjun had never known before, calm, yet full of purpose. The foundation grew stronger each week. Volunteers from different cities began to reach out, eager to help, inspired by his story. What had once started as a single act of compassion was now turning into a movement. The Bridge of Hope wasn't just an organization anymore, it was a symbol, a reminder that pain could be transformed into power, and loss could be reborn as love. Arjun spent most of his days surrounded by laughter. The children filled the building with energy, running through corridors, painting, singing, dreaming. Every time he looked at them, he felt something inside him heal a little more. Their joy was contagious, their resilience unmatched. It reminded him of a truth he had once forgotten, that happiness doesn't come from what we have, but from what we give. One afternoon, he sat under a large banyan tree outside the foundation, watching the kids play football. The sunlight filtered through the branches, and for a moment, the world felt perfectly still. He thought of his mother again. What would she say if she could see him now? He imagined her gentle smile, her proud eyes, her warm hand on his shoulder. "Ma," he whispered softly, "I think I finally understand." A soft wind brushed his face, almost as if the universe was answering him. That evening, as he was preparing to leave, a journalist visited the foundation. She had been following Arjun's journey for months and wanted to feature his story in a national magazine. He agreed, not for fame, but because he believed more people needed to hear that it was possible to rise from the darkest moments. The interview was simple, sincere. She asked him, "What kept you going when everything around you was falling apart?" Arjun thought for a while before answering. "The belief that every struggle has meaning. I used to think pain was punishment, but now I see it as preparation. Life wasn't breaking me. It was shaping me into someone who could help others stand again." His words resonated deeply. When the article was published, it reached millions. Messages flooded his inbox, from soldiers recovering from trauma, from mothers who had lost their children, from students who felt hopeless about their future. Each message carried the same theme: your story gave me strength to keep living. Arjun read every single one. Sometimes he cried. Sometimes he smiled. But each message reminded him that the ripples of kindness never stop. They just keep spreading in ways unseen. One morning, he received an email from a university inviting him to give a lecture on resilience. It was the same university that had once rejected his startup idea years ago. He smiled at the irony of fate. The same place that had once marked his failure now wanted to celebrate his growth. When he walked onto the stage of that university auditorium, the students rose to greet him with applause. He looked at their eager faces and said, "I once stood right here, feeling like a failure. I thought my dreams had ended. But life has a strange way of turning endings into beginnings. Don't fear your setbacks, they're the raw material of your strength." The silence in the hall was profound. Some students wiped their eyes. Others nodded quietly. And when he finished speaking, he saw something familiar, the same spark that had once returned to his own eyes years ago. That night, as he drove back home through the quiet roads, Arjun felt a deep sense of peace. He wasn't chasing anything anymore. Not success, not approval, not recognition. He was simply being, living each day with intention, compassion, and gratitude. But life, in its mysterious way, had more in store for him. One evening, while reviewing plans for expanding the foundation, he received a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice spoke softly on the other end. "Mr. Arjun, I don't know if you remember me. I was one of your mother's nurses when she was in the hospital." His heart skipped. "Yes, I remember. How are you?" "I'm well," she said. "I've been following your work. Your mother would be so proud. Before she passed, she told me to give you something if I ever met you again." She paused for a moment. "I kept it safe all these years. Would you be able to meet me tomorrow?" The next day, he met her at a small cafe near the hospital. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, but her smile was kind and familiar. She handed him a small, faded envelope with his name written in his mother's handwriting. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a simple note. "My dear Arjun, when life feels unbearable, remember this. The storms you face are not meant to drown you, but to teach you how to dance in the rain. You were born to shine, even in darkness. Promise me that you'll never stop helping others find their light." Ma. Tears blurred his vision. He pressed the letter to his chest, whispering, "I promise." That letter became his most treasured possession. He framed it and placed it on the wall of his office at the foundation. Whenever he felt lost or tired, he would look at it and find strength again. Months passed, and his foundation grew into a nationwide initiative. Schools partnered with him, corporations funded scholarships, and thousands of children found opportunities they never dreamed of. But no matter how big it grew, Arjun kept one thing constant. Every morning, he spent the first few minutes with the children, listening to their dreams, laughing with them, reminding them that they were capable of anything. One day, during a celebration at the foundation, a little boy tugged at his sleeve. "Sir, can I ask you something?" Arjun smiled. "Of course. Why do you work so hard for us every day?" He knelt down and looked into the boy's bright eyes. "Because once upon a time, someone helped me when I had nothing. And I promised myself I would spend the rest of my life doing the same for others." The boy grinned. "Then I'll help people too when I grow up." Arjun laughed softly, ruffling his hair. "That's all I could ever hope for." As the evening sky turned golden, Arjun stood at the balcony, watching the children play below. He felt the same peace he once found in the rain, the same quiet whisper that had guided him through every storm. The pain, the loss, the loneliness, they had all been chapters of the same story. And though the wounds had once bled deeply, they had now become symbols of how far he had come. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, knowing that somewhere beyond the clouds, his mother was smiling, proud, peaceful, and eternally close. The sky deepened into shades of orange and purple, and the last light of the day bathed the world in warmth. Arjun stood quietly, hands resting on the railing of the balcony, watching as laughter floated up from below. The children ran in circles, their shouts echoing through the courtyard. The sound filled him with a sense of belonging that words could never describe. He had once lived in a room so silent it hurt, but now every moment of noise was a blessing, proof that life, despite everything, was still beautifully alive. As darkness slowly descended, the lights around the foundation flickered on, soft and golden. Volunteers began tidying up, stacking chairs, sweeping the floors. A few of the older kids waved goodnight to him before heading to their dormitories. Arjun waved back, smiling, his heart calm but full. He walked back to his office, where his mother's letter hung framed on the wall. He looked at it as he always did before leaving. The handwriting was slightly faded now, but every word still carried the same power. It reminded him that love doesn't die. It simply transforms into something eternal, something that lives in the work we do, in the lives we touch, in the courage we pass on. He sat at his desk, flipping open his old notebook. Pages were filled with notes, plans, and scattered thoughts, ideas for new projects, stories of the people he'd met, dreams he wanted to bring to life. One particular note caught his eye: start a mentorship program for teenagers struggling with purpose. He smiled. That was something he had been meaning to do for months. He picked up his pen and began outlining the idea, writing with the same energy he once had when he was starting from nothing. His passion was the same, only now it was grounded in wisdom. He knew the pain of being lost, and he wanted to guide others through that darkness, not with theories, but with truth, with experience, with heart. Hours passed, and before he knew it, it was midnight. The building was quiet except for the occasional creak of the wooden floor. Arjun leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. His mind wandered to the past, to the bridge, the boy with the flowers, his mother's gentle voice. So many faces, so many moments stitched together into the fabric of his story. And it all began when he thought his life had ended. He realized then that every ending carries the seed of a beginning. That was the essence of life, the cycle of breaking and rebuilding, of losing and finding, of falling and rising again. A sudden vibration on his desk pulled him back. His phone screen lit up with a message from the same young man who had once sold him flowers on that rainy night years ago. The message read, "Sir, I just got accepted into a teaching program abroad. I wanted you to be the first to know. Thank you for everything." Arjun's eyes softened as he read it. He typed back slowly, "I'm proud of you. Keep shining and never forget where you came from. The world needs hearts like yours." He set the phone aside, a faint smile still on his lips. There was something deeply fulfilling about watching the seeds he had once planted begin to grow into forests of hope. It reminded him that true success is never about what you build for yourself, it's about what you build in others. A few days later, Arjun was invited to a global conference in Singapore. The event focused on resilience, leadership, and emotional healing, the very essence of his life's work. He hesitated at first. Traveling meant being away from a foundation, from his children, from his daily rhythm of simplicity. But his colleagues insisted, saying that his story needed to reach more people. Reluctantly, he agreed. When he arrived in Singapore, he was greeted by a team of organizers and journalists eager to hear him speak. The city was modern, glowing, alive with energy. As he looked out from his hotel balcony that night, the skyline glittered like a reflection of all the lives that had dared to dream again. He thought about his journey from that cracked-walled room to this shining city. It felt unreal, but he knew it wasn't luck or fate. It was persistence, pain, and grace woven together. On the day of his speech, the hall was filled with thousands. Leaders, students, entrepreneurs, dreamers, all gathered to listen. Arjun stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding him. But then he remembered his mother's letter. Her words echoed softly in his mind, "Dance in the rain." He smiled and began. "I used to think that when life breaks you, it's a sign to stop," he said. "But I learned that sometimes it breaks you only to open you, to show you what you're made of. The pain you carry is not there to punish you. It's there to prepare you for the person you're meant to become." The hall was silent. Every eye watched him, every heart listened. He spoke about the nights of loneliness, the small acts of kindness that saved him, the power of refusing to give up. He told them about the boy with the flowers, about his mother's strength, about the foundation and its children. And then he said, his voice trembling slightly, "Hard times are not the enemy. They are the teachers life sends when you're ready to learn what comfort can never teach. Do not fear them. Face them, learn from them, and you'll find your own light." When he finished, the entire hall rose in applause. Some were crying, some smiling, but all of them were moved. After the event, dozens of people came to him, thanking him for reminding them that their struggles had meaning. Arjun listened humbly, grateful but calm. He knew this moment wasn't about fame or glory, it was about connection. It was about souls finding strength in shared pain. That night, as he returned to his room, he stood by the window and looked out at the glittering city once more. Somewhere far away, his foundation lights were glowing too, and he felt that invisible thread again, the one connecting all hearts that had ever broken and healed. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to life itself, for breaking him, rebuilding him, and making him whole in ways he never imagined." And as the moon rose higher above the city, casting its quiet silver light, Arjun felt the same peace he had found under the rain years ago, a peace born not from having everything, but from understanding everything. The sound of the train wheels hummed steadily beneath Arjun's seat. He stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past. Cities turned to villages, villages to open fields. His reflection on the glass looked older than he remembered, tired, weathered, but somehow calmer. The chaos he once carried inside had quieted, replaced by something deeper, acceptance. It had been months since he had left the city behind. He'd started working odd jobs in different towns, teaching children, helping local farmers, sleeping under starlit skies, where the air smelled of soil and peace. He had learned to live simply, to listen more than speak, and to see beauty even in struggle. But no matter how far he traveled, the thought of facing his past, the people he had disappointed, the friends he had pushed away, still lingered in his heart like an unfinished chapter. One evening, as he sat beside a river with his journal open, a little boy approached him with curious eyes. "Mister, why are you always writing?" the boy asked. Arjun smiled faintly. "Because it helps me understand what I feel," he replied. "Are you sad?" He paused. "I used to be. But now I think I'm just learning." The boy tilted his head. "My teacher says learning never ends, even when you're old." Arjun chuckled softly. "Your teacher is very wise." The boy grinned and ran off, leaving Arjun to stare at the calm surface of the water. It reflected the evening sky, pink fading into gold, clouds drifting lazily. For the first time in years, Arjun didn't feel like running away. He felt ready to return. When he arrived back in the city, the air hit him differently, loud, heavy, alive. The same streets that once suffocated him now felt like memories he had finally grown strong enough to face. He walked past his old apartment, the one with the flickering streetlight out front. The window was dark, dust gathering on the sill. He smiled to himself. It felt like looking at a ghost, one that no longer haunted him. He went to see his mentor, Mr. Mehra, the man who had first believed in him when he had nothing. The old man's bookstore still stood, tucked between a tea shop and a small tailor shop. The smell of paper and ink wrapped around Arjun like an embrace as he stepped inside. "Sir," Arjun called softly. The old man looked up, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Arjun," he said, disbelief and warmth mingling in his voice. "Yes," Arjun whispered. "It's me." Mr. Mehra smiled, his eyes misty. "I knew you'd come back. I always knew." I almost didn't," Arjun admitted. "I lost myself for a long time." "That's what journeys are for," Mr. Mehra said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "To lose yourself so you can find what truly matters." They talked for hours. Arjun told him everything about the nights he spent alone, the lessons he learned from strangers, the days he thought he wouldn't make it. Mr. Mehra listened without judgment, his silence full of understanding. When Arjun finally paused, the old man handed him a worn-out book. "I kept this for you," he said. "It's your own story. You started writing it here before you left. I think it's time you finish it." Arjun opened the book. The pages yellowed, but his handwriting still familiar. He smiled faintly, remembering the boy he used to be, broken but brave enough to hope. "I think you're right," he said quietly. "It's time." Over the next few months, Arjun began teaching again, this time not in a classroom, but in life. He gathered young people who had lost direction, who felt invisible, who thought failure defined them. He told them stories, not of heroes or perfection, but of people who had fallen and risen again. Every time he spoke, he saw hope flicker in their eyes, the same kind he once needed. One night, after a long day of teaching, Arjun sat by his window, notebook in hand. He wrote, "We don't overcome hard times by erasing them. We overcome them by walking through them, one breath at a time." His phone buzzed, a message from his sister, whom he hadn't spoken to in years. It simply read, "I saw your talk online. I'm proud of you. He closed his eyes, feeling tears slide down his cheeks. For so long, he thought he had lost everything, his purpose, his people, his place in the world. But maybe, just maybe, he had found something greater, himself. Days turned into weeks. Arjun began traveling again, but now he wasn't escaping, he was sharing. Villages, cities, schools, and small communities welcomed him. He spoke about resilience not as a concept, but as something lived, breathed, and earned. People who once believed their stories were over began to write again, not with ink, but with courage. During one talk, an elderly woman came up to him afterward. Her eyes were soft but sad. "You speak like someone who has known pain deeply," she said. He smiled. "Pain taught me what peace could never." She nodded slowly. "And peace?" He looked out the window, where children were laughing in the rain. "Peace," he said, "is learning to love the world even after it breaks you." That night, back in his small rented room, Arjun lit a candle beside his notebook. The light danced across the walls, warm and flickering. He thought about how far he had come from standing on that rooftop years ago, ready to give up, to standing now, ready to give everything he had learned back to the world. He picked up his pen and began to write again. But this time, he didn't write to escape. He wrote to remember, to remind himself that even in the darkest tunnels, light is not found, it is made. Outside, thunder rolled softly, followed by the gentle rhythm of rain. It felt cleansing, like the sky itself was washing away the weight of the past. Arjun smiled to himself, whispering into the quiet, "Hard times don't last forever. But the lessons they leave, those stay with us for life." He leaned back, exhaled deeply, and closed his eyes. For the first time, his heart wasn't searching for meaning. It was the meaning. The candle's flame flickered as the night deepened, its light tracing soft golden shadows across the pages of Arjun's journal. The air outside had turned cool, carrying the faint scent of wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, a stray dog barked, then silence fell again, deep, reflective, almost sacred. Arjun's pen hovered above the paper. He wasn't sure what to write next. Words had once been his escape, his attempt to make sense of pain. But now they felt like a bridge between who he had been and who he was becoming. Slowly, he began to write again. "Life doesn't wait for us to be ready," he scribbled. "It breaks us when it must, teaches us when we resist, and heals us when we least expect it. Maybe the goal isn't to avoid pain, but to let it refine us." He paused, staring at those lines. They didn't feel like something written for others. They felt like a message meant for himself, a quiet reminder to keep walking even when the path blurred. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming softly on the roof. Arjun stood, walked toward the window, and opened it. The wind rushed in, cool against his skin. Drops of rain touched his hand as he reached out, and for a moment, he simply stood there, feeling alive, completely and utterly present. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from one of his students. "Sir, I listened to your story again tonight. I was feeling hopeless, but now I think maybe I still have a chance. Thank you." Arjun smiled faintly. Those few words filled him with a quiet joy. It wasn't fame he wanted anymore, nor recognition. It was connection, souls finding strength in shared pain, strangers realizing they weren't alone. That, he thought, was the real reward. He spent the following days preparing for another talk, this one at a large university. When he arrived, the hall was filled with students, teachers, and curious listeners. Many of them looked lost, just as he once had. Arjun stood on the stage, hands trembling slightly. "When I was your age," he began, "I thought failure was the end of the world. I thought that losing something meant I wasn't enough. But life showed me something different. It showed me that falling isn't failure, it's preparation. Every time we fall, we shed a layer of fear. Every time we rise, we become more of who we're meant to be." The audience was silent, not because they were bored, but because they were feeling. His voice carried the weight of lived truth. He wasn't just a speaker, he was a survivor. He shared his story, not to impress, but to express. He spoke of nights when he wanted to give up, of mornings when he had no reason to keep going, but did anyway. He talked about pain not as punishment, but as transformation. And when he finished, there was a long pause before the applause began, slow, steady, heartfelt. People stood, some with tears in their eyes. And as Arjun stepped off the stage, a young woman approached him, holding a small notebook. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking, "I used to write too, but I stopped when everything in my life fell apart. Hearing you today made me want to write again." Arjun smiled softly. Then right, he said. Even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. Because that's when the truth comes out. She nodded, her eyes glistening, and walked away clutching her notebook like a promise. That night, as Arjun walked home beneath the quiet stars, he realized something profound. The same pain that once made him hide from the world had now made him capable of healing it. What had once been a scar had turned into a source of light. He stopped by a small park near his apartment, a place he hadn't visited in years. The swings creaked faintly in the breeze, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. He sat on a bench, watching a stray cat curl up near a lamppost. For a long time, he simply breathed, feeling the rhythm of the night around him. He remembered his father's words, ones he had ignored years ago. Strength isn't how much you can carry, Arjun. It's how much you can let go. He finally understood. Letting go wasn't losing. It was choosing peace over chaos, choosing to keep walking even when the road was uncertain. In the days that followed, Arjun's life began to fill with quiet purpose. He received invitations to speak across the country, not because he was famous, but because people resonated with his honesty. He still lived simply, no luxury, no spotlight. Just meaning. Just truth. One afternoon, while traveling to another small town, his train stopped at a familiar station, the same one where his journey of rediscovery had begun months ago. He stepped onto the platform, the sound of vendors shouting, the smell of chai brewing nearby. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. He bought a cup of tea and sat by the window of the waiting room. A little boy passed by, selling flowers. Arjun called him over and bought a small bunch of white roses. The boy's eyes lit up with gratitude. "Who are they for, sir?" he asked. "For no one," Arjun said, smiling. "Just to remember something." "Remember what?" "That even after storms, flowers still bloom." The boy grinned, waved, and ran off. Arjun looked down at the roses, their petals soft, their scent gentle. He placed them beside his notebook on the table and took a deep breath. In that moment, he felt the strange, quiet peace of someone who had finally stopped fighting the world and started understanding it instead. He opened his notebook again and wrote, "Pain will visit you many times. But each time, it leaves behind a gift. Sometimes strength, sometimes wisdom, and sometimes a story worth telling." As the train whistle echoed again, Arjun gathered his things, picked up the flowers, and stepped onto the platform. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson. He watched it for a while, letting its light fill him. Then, with a calm heart and steady breath, he began to walk again, forward, into whatever waited next. As Arjun walked along the platform, the evening breeze brushed against his face, carrying with it the faint scent of roasted peanuts and dust from passing trains. The sound of footsteps and murmured conversations faded behind him as he made his way toward the edge of the station. The horizon glowed a deep crimson, and the last light of the setting sun stretched across the tracks like golden threads. He paused there for a moment, his suitcase in one hand, notebook in the other. Life had once felt like these endless rails, running forward, uncertain of the destination, but bound to continue. He smiled quietly to himself. Maybe that was what living really was, not about knowing where you're going, but about moving anyway. When he reached the next town, it was already dark. The streets were quiet, lined with dim lights and the soft hum of night insects. He checked into a small guest house, the kind where the rooms were simple but the beds were warm. The caretaker, an elderly woman with kind eyes, looked at him and said, "You look tired, son. But peaceful. Not many carry both at the same time." Arjun chuckled softly. "I guess that's what happens when you stop running from your pain." The woman smiled knowingly. "Pain never wanted to chase you, my dear. It only wanted you to stop and listen." Her words lingered with him long after she left. He sat by the window, watching the moon rise above the rooftops, its pale glow spilling across his desk. He opened his notebook again and began to write, not speeches or lessons this time, but pieces of himself he had long forgotten. Memories of laughter with his friends, the sound of rain on his childhood home, the first time he had felt heartbreak. Every word felt like breathing again after years underwater. The next morning, he woke early to the sound of temple bells and roosters crowing in the distance. He dressed and stepped outside, greeted by a sky painted in soft shades of blue and gold. Children were walking to school, women were sweeping their porches, and life, ordinary yet miraculous, was unfolding all around him. He walked through the marketplace, stopping to buy breakfast from a small vendor. As he ate, a young man approached him, nervous but determined. "Sir, are you the one who speaks about life and strength?" Arjun smiled humbly. "I suppose I am." The young man hesitated before speaking again. "I wanted to thank you. I watched your talk online. I was at a point where I wanted to give up, but your words made me think differently. You said pain isn't punishment, it's transformation. I didn't understand it then. Now I do." Arjun looked at him closely. His eyes reminded him of his own from years ago, full of questions, yet holding a spark of hope. "I'm glad," he said softly. "Remember, storms come to clear the path, not destroy it. Don't run from what hurts. Walk through it. That's how you find who you really are." The young man nodded, his eyes glistening. "Thank you, sir." And with that, he disappeared into the crowd. Arjun sat there for a while, staring at the empty space where the boy had stood. Each encounter lately felt like a mirror, showing him fragments of his old self through the eyes of others who were still fighting their battles. And in helping them, he realized he was still healing too. Later that day, he was invited to speak at a community center nearby. It wasn't a grand hall, just a small room with chairs arranged in a circle. People of all ages filled the space. Young students, tired workers, elderly men, and women with eyes that carried both wisdom and sorrow. When Arjun stood before them, he didn't open his notebook. He spoke straight from his heart. "Every one of you here has known pain," he began. "Some of you are still living in it. You wonder when it will end, or if it ever will. I used to ask the same questions. But what I've learned is that pain doesn't end when the situation changes. It ends when you do, when you stop letting it define who you are." The room was silent. Every face was turned toward him, listening intently. "I used to believe I had to fix my life before I could be happy. But happiness isn't waiting at the end of a road, it's built along the way. Every scar you carry is proof that you survived something that tried to break you. Don't hide them. They are not your shame, they are your strength." When he finished speaking, an old man stood up slowly. His voice trembled as he said, "You speak as if pain is a friend." Arjun smiled. "It became one when I stopped fearing it." That evening, as the crowd dispersed, a little girl came up to him and handed him a single white flower. "Mama said flowers bloom after the rain," she said innocently. "So I wanted to give you this." Arjun took the flower gently. "That's very kind of you," he said softly. The child grinned. "Maybe you're like a flower too, mister. You bloomed after your rain." Her words pierced his heart in the most beautiful way. He nodded, unable to speak, and watched as she ran back to her mother. Later that night, Arjun walked to the edge of town, where the land opened into fields. Fireflies shimmered in the darkness, blinking like stars scattered across the grass. He sat down, his flower resting on his notebook, and looked up at the vast sky. He thought about how many people were out there at that very moment, hurting, doubting, breaking, and how many of them had no idea that their pain could one day become their power. He wanted to reach them all, not to preach, but to remind them that they were not alone. He whispered to the night, as if the universe itself could hear, "Let those who are lost find their way back to light. Let those who are broken see that they still have purpose. And let those who doubt themselves remember they are enough." The wind stirred gently, carrying his words away, scattering them like seeds. And in that stillness, Arjun felt something within him shift, a quiet certainty that he had found his path. Not one of perfection or endless joy, but one of meaning. He leaned back, watching the stars flicker above him, and smiled to himself. The world was vast, uncertain, and often cruel, but it was also achingly beautiful. And he was no longer afraid to walk through it. The night stretched on, deep and endless, the stars above glowing faintly through the thin mist that hung over the fields. Arjun sat quietly, his thoughts drifting like the cool breeze that brushed through the tall grass. He could hear the soft hum of crickets, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the distant bark of a dog. For the first time in years, silence didn't scare him. It comforted him. It felt like a friend who had waited patiently for him to return. He closed his eyes and remembered the days when silence was unbearable, when his own thoughts screamed so loudly that he would drown them with noise, with distractions, with anything that made him feel alive for a moment. But now the same silence that once felt suffocating had become the very thing that grounded him. A small gust of wind carried the scent of jasmine again, delicate and pure. He smiled faintly, glancing down at the flower the little girl had given him earlier. Its petals were still fresh, glistening faintly under the moonlight. It reminded him of innocence, of beginnings, of the beauty that could exist even after storms. He took out his pen and wrote slowly in his notebook. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't fighting the storm, but standing still in the rain and trusting that it will pass. The words flowed easily now, not forced or labored. They felt natural, like breathing. Every line he wrote carried a piece of him, not the broken man he once was, but the person he was becoming, patient, aware, resilient. He didn't realize how long he had been sitting there until the first hints of dawn began to color the horizon. The deep black of the night softened into shades of blue and gold. Birds began to stir in the trees, their early songs filling the air with life. The world was waking up again, and so was he. Arjun stood, stretching his arms as the sun began to rise. The warmth touched his face, and for a moment he closed his eyes and let it sink in. There was something profoundly healing about that light, gentle, consistent, forgiving. He walked slowly back toward the town. The streets were quiet, except for the soft sound of brooms sweeping and shopkeepers opening their stalls. He stopped by a tea stall, the same one he had visited the day before, and ordered a cup. The vendor smiled, recognizing him. "You travel a lot, sir." Arjun nodded. "Yes. I suppose I'm learning from the road." The man chuckled. "The road teaches everyone who listens." Arjun smiled. "That's true. The road doesn't lie. It shows you who you are." He sipped his tea, savoring the warmth, and watched the world move around him. The mother walking her child to school, the old man reading a newspaper, the dogs sleeping in patches of sunlight. Ordinary moments, yet somehow sacred in their simplicity. He thought about how he used to chase big dreams, believing that happiness waited somewhere in the distance. Now he found it here, in the smallness of life, in quiet mornings, in simple acts of kindness. Later that day, he visited a local school where he had been invited to speak. The children were gathered in the courtyard, sitting cross-legged with wide, curious eyes. Their teacher introduced him, but Arjun didn't want to sound like a lecturer. He sat down on the ground with them, smiling. "Do you know what happens when you plant a seed?" he asked. A little boy raised his hand eagerly. "It grows into a tree." Arjun nodded. "That's right. But before it grows, it has to stay in the dark soil for a long time. No light, no air, no one seeing it. It just waits. And it hurts sometimes, doesn't it? Being buried." The children nodded, some frowning thoughtfully. But Arjun continued softly. "If the seed is patient, if it doesn't give up, something magical happens. It begins to grow roots. And one day, it pushes through the soil and meets the light. That's how we are, too. Sometimes life buries us so that we can grow stronger roots." The children's faces lit up with understanding. Some smiled, some whispered to each other, and the teacher nodded quietly in the back. As the day went on, Arjun stayed with them, helping with small lessons, playing games, and listening to their dreams. One little girl told him she wanted to be a doctor, but was afraid she wasn't smart enough. He looked at her gently and said, "Courage is smarter than fear. Every time you try, you win." When he left the school that afternoon, the sun was already sinking again. The sky burned in shades of orange and purple, and the laughter of children echoed behind him. He felt light. Not because everything was perfect, but because he no longer needed it to be. That night, back in his small room, he looked at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes were calm, steady. There were still traces of pain, yes, but they no longer defined him. They were just part of his story. He touched the small scar near his temple, a reminder of a time he had nearly given up, and whispered, "Thank you." He realized he wasn't thanking life for being kind. He was thanking it for being hard enough to teach him. For showing him that strength isn't found in avoiding pain, but in facing it, surviving it, and rising anyway. His phone buzzed again, another message, this time from a man he had met months ago during his travels. The message read, "I took your advice. I forgave myself. It's strange, but I finally feel free." Arjun closed his eyes, his chest tightening with emotion. That was it. That was why he was here. Not to live a perfect life, but to remind others that they could live through imperfection and still find peace. He sat by the window, the cool air brushing against his skin, the moon climbing high again. He opened his notebook one last time for the night and wrote, "We spend so much time trying to escape pain when all along it was trying to guide us home." He put the pen down and stared out into the night, the same stars above him shimmering faintly. Somewhere in some part of the world, another soul was probably sitting under that same sky, wondering if they could make it through their darkness. Arjun smiled softly, almost as if speaking to them. "You will," he whispered. "You just have to keep walking." And the night, vast and eternal, seemed to whisper back, carrying his words far into the world. The night air carried a gentle chill, and the stars above seemed brighter than usual, scattered like silver dust across the endless sky. Arjun stayed by the window, his hand still resting on the open page of his notebook. The candle beside him had burned low, its flame flickering softly, as if listening to the silence around him. He took a deep breath, feeling that familiar ache in his chest, not the sharp pain of sadness anymore, but a deep, quiet longing for something greater than himself. He thought about all the people he had met in his journey, the boy by the river who asked if he was sad, the old man who said journeys were for losing yourself, the young woman who found the courage to write again. Each one of them had become a part of him, like small threads woven into the fabric of his story. They were proof that even the smallest encounters could change the course of a life. As he stared into the night, he realized that perhaps the hardest times in life weren't meant to break us, but to prepare us for the moments when others would need our light. Maybe that was why he had to go through all that pain, so he could understand it enough to help someone else carry theirs. He closed his notebook gently and leaned his head against the window frame. The sound of the wind brushing through the trees outside was soothing. It reminded him of the night long ago when he had stood on a rooftop, convinced that his story was over. Now, years later, he was still here, breathing, healing, becoming. That realization filled his heart with quiet gratitude. The next morning came softly. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, touching his face with warmth. Arjun woke with a calm heart, the kind of calm that only comes after weathering countless storms. He packed his bag, slipped the white flower from the little girl between the pages of his notebook, and set out toward the station again. He didn't have a plan. He didn't need one. Wherever he went, he carried his purpose with him now. On the train, he sat by the window, watching fields pass by in a blur of green and gold. Across from him sat a young man in his 20s, tapping his fingers nervously against his knee. He looked anxious, lost in thought. After a while, Arjun asked gently, "First time traveling alone?" The man looked up, startled, then nodded. "Yes. I'm leaving home. Things weren't working out." Arjun listened quietly. The man's eyes were red, and his voice trembled slightly. "I had dreams," he continued. "Big ones. But no one believed in me. My father said I'd never make it. My friends stopped talking to me. I just couldn't stay anymore." Arjun smiled softly. Sometimes leaving isn't running away. It's making space to breathe again. The young man sighed. "But it hurts, you know? Feeling like you've disappointed everyone. Like no matter what you do, it's not enough." Arjun looked out the window for a moment, remembering his own past words echoing in his mind, the countless nights he'd whispered them to himself. "You're not here to be enough for others," he said finally. "You're here to be true to yourself. Sometimes people won't understand that, but one day they'll see the light you were building in silence." The young man stared at him, eyes softening. "Do you really believe that?" Arjun nodded. "I don't just believe it. I've lived it." For the rest of the journey, they talked about life, about failure, about the strange beauty of starting over. When the train reached the next station, the young man stood up and said, "Thank you, sir. You don't know how much I needed this conversation." Arjun smiled. "Maybe I do." He watched as the man stepped off the train, disappearing into the crowd, his shoulders a little straighter than before. Arjun leaned back in his seat, a quiet satisfaction washing over him. Every person he met felt like another reminder of how far he had come. The man he used to be would have never imagined being someone's reason to keep going. The journey continued, the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels forming a steady, comforting beat. He began writing again, this time not as a teacher or a speaker, but as a traveler documenting the small lessons life revealed along the way. His handwriting flowed freely, lines filled with humility and truth. "Strength," he wrote, "is not built in the moments we win, but in the moments we refuse to give up. Even when the world turns its back, even when no one claps for us, we keep walking, because something inside us knows that light exists beyond the darkness." As he finished the line, he looked out the window again. A small child was running along the edge of the tracks, waving at the train as it passed. Arjun waved back instinctively, smiling as the boy's laughter faded into the distance. That simple exchange filled his heart with warmth. Life had a way of giving back small miracles when you least expected them. When he reached his destination, the evening sun was glowing over the rooftops. The town was peaceful, nestled between hills and rivers. Arjun walked toward a small inn and checked in for the night. The owner, an elderly man with a kind face, recognized him immediately. "Ah, you're the speaker I heard on the radio last month," the man said, smiling. "Your words, they stayed with me." Arjun bowed his head slightly. "I'm glad they helped." The man nodded. "More than you know. My son was going through a difficult time. I made him listen to your story. It gave him hope." Hearing that, Arjun felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't realized how far his voice had traveled, how many hearts it had quietly reached. All those sleepless nights, the tears, the moments of doubt, they had all led to this. Connection, purpose, meaning. That night, sitting by the window once more, he looked at the stars again. They seemed closer now, brighter. He thought of the people who still felt trapped in their darkness, those who hadn't yet seen the dawn he had found. He whispered softly into the night, "May they find their light too." He knew now that pain wasn't his enemy. It had been his teacher, his sculptor, his silent guide. Every heartbreak, every fall, every loss had shaped him into someone who could see beauty even in brokenness. And as he sat there, the wind playing gently with the curtains, Arjun realized something profound. Maybe the purpose of his life was never to escape struggle, but to become a living example that struggle could be survived, and even transformed into something beautiful. He closed his notebook, not because his story was over, but because it was finally alive, breathing, unfolding, continuing with every step he took into tomorrow. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Arjun's journey carried him across towns, villages, and cities, each filled with faces, stories, and lessons that deepened his understanding of life. His name began to travel far beyond what he could have ever imagined, not because he sought fame, but because his message resonated with something timeless inside every human heart. He didn't speak to impress anymore. He spoke to heal, to remind people that every scar carried a story, and every fall held a hidden strength waiting to be uncovered. One evening, as the golden light of dusk poured through the trees, Arjun stood before a vast audience. Thousands had gathered in an open field to hear him speak. Some had traveled miles, some had been following him for years, and others had simply stumbled upon his words by chance. The air was thick with anticipation. Yet as he stepped onto the stage, he felt no nervousness, only peace. He looked around, taking in the sea of faces before him. There were children sitting cross-legged in the front, old men leaning on their canes, mothers holding their babies close. And for a moment, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, smiling softly, letting the silence speak louder than any word could. Then, in a calm, steady voice, he began. "Once I thought life was unfair. I thought I was cursed to live in darkness while others basked in light. I begged for answers, but all I found was pain. And then one day, I stopped asking why. I stopped running from a hurt and started listening to it. That was the moment everything changed." The crowd listened in absolute stillness. Arjun took a slow breath and continued, "Pain isn't a punishment, it's a passage. It breaks you so that you can rebuild yourself with deeper compassion. It silences you so you can finally hear your own soul whispering what truly matters. We spend so much time trying to avoid hardship that we forget it is hardship that forges the strength we admire in others." He paused, scanning the audience. Every one of you sitting here has been through something. Betrayal, loss, failure, grief. You've been broken in ways words can't describe. But if you're still breathing, if your heart is still beating, it means life hasn't given up on you yet. It means your story isn't over. The words seemed to ripple through the crowd like a wave, soft yet powerful. People's eyes began to glisten with tears. He went on, his voice gaining warmth and conviction. "I used to think light meant never facing darkness. But now I know light exists because of darkness. You can't know your strength until you've felt your weakness. You can't appreciate joy until you've known despair. Every storm you've survived wasn't sent to destroy you. It was sent to prepare you for the sunlight that follows." He lifted his gaze toward the horizon, where the sun was sinking behind the hills, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. "There were nights I cried until I couldn't breathe. Days when I thought I'd never rise again. But here I am. Not because I'm stronger than others, but because I stopped waiting for someone to save me. I learned to save myself." He smiled faintly. "And so can you." A soft murmur moved through the crowd, people nodding, some closing their eyes, feeling the truth in his words. Arjun stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "Listen to me," he said gently. "Your past does not define you. Your failures do not own you. Every mistake, every heartbreak, every closed door, it's all a chapter, not your ending. Life isn't asking you to be perfect. It's asking you to be present, to show up even when it hurts, to keep walking even when the path disappears beneath your feet." He pointed toward the audience, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "You are not broken. You are becoming." For a few seconds, the world seemed to stop. The crowd was silent, lost in the weight of his words. Then, slowly, Arjun continued, his tone soft but powerful, like the calm after storm. "There's a fire inside you," he said, "one that no failure can extinguish, no heartbreak can destroy. It may flicker, it may dim, but it never dies. It's waiting for you to believe in it again. So when life pushes you down, don't curse the fall. Thank it for teaching you how to rise." The wind picked up, brushing gently against his face. He lifted his arms slightly, as if embracing the entire world. "Remember," he whispered, "diamonds are born from pressure. Stars shine only in darkness. And strength, true strength, is not found in never falling, but in rising after every fall with a heart still open." A hush filled the air, heavy and electric. Then a single person began to clap. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the field erupted into thunderous applause. Some stood up, others wiped tears from their cheeks, and many simply held their hands to their hearts. Arjun closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him, not as praise, but as a confirmation that his pain had found its purpose. Later that night, he sat by a lake under a canopy of stars. The reflection of the moon shimmered on the still water. He opened his notebook one last time and wrote in simple, flowing lines. "Life will break you. It will test you. It will bend you until you think you can't bear another day. But then it will surprise you. One morning, you'll wake up and realize that the storm that tried to destroy you was the reason you learned to dance in the rain. And that's when you'll know you never lost. You only transformed." He closed the notebook, feeling the cool wind touch his face. For the first time, there was no ache in his heart, no weight on his shoulders. Just peace. Arjun looked up at the stars and smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. He had walked through fire, drowned in sorrow, and risen with wisdom. And now, as he sat in the stillness of the night, he understood the secret of life. We don't overcome hard times by escaping them. We overcome them by allowing them to shape us into something extraordinary. The stars shimmered brighter, as if bowing to his truth. The night was vast, the silence eternal, and in that sacred quiet, Arjun's journey found its purpose, not in glory, not in victory, but in the grace of becoming whole again.